Hi there, this is Cindy Liu of CHRO Partners, and I'm joined today with Susan Madonia and Nancy Johnson. And today we're going to talk about accelerating talent development through challenge and change. And that's certainly something we're all experiencing right now. So we've got a really special treat for you today. Susan of Executive Coaching Connections has been a amazing supporter of the Big HR event for many years now. And so we're really happy to have her on. And she was telling me about the amazing things that Nancy has been doing. And so I'm going to pass it over to you, Susan, to tell us a little bit more about Nancy and what we're in for today.
Okay, Cindy, thank you so much. We're so pleased to be here. And, I just want to share for those listeners a couple data points to really frame why this topic around talent management is so critical during volatile times. And a couple data points that our organization had really brought to highlight is that the conference board, which we're a member of, actually did some research with CEOs around the globe. And it was really interesting that in 2020, most CEOs globally that they surveyed, the number 1 and 2 concerns that they had were, one, how are they going to find the talent to execute their strategy, their business strategy? And then the other concern or what's keeping them up at night was, how do they get that next generation of leaders ready for the next step? So we found that very interesting in the work that we do. And then all of you on this call, I'm sure, are keenly aware of the talent shortage, and you probably felt it in some way. A couple statistics that you might find really interesting. In 2000, since 2010, the talent shortage in the US has tripled. It is estimated that about 70% of the US companies are feeling the squeeze and the pinch and the pain of not finding the right talent at the right time. So again, I'm assuming that the vast majority of people on the call are saying, yes, I can relate to that. What I found really interesting from a global perspective is there are 40 million positions that are being left unopened currently. And in 2030, that 40 million is going to grow to 85 million. What does that mean to the bottom line to your businesses? Well, from a financial impact, worldwide, there could be an $8.4 trillion loss to businesses globally. So with that said, we thought that Nancy Johnson could really help us frame how important the area of talent management is. And let me just say a word or two about Nancy. So Nancy and I have worked together many years in different formats. She is the VP of Talent and Talent Acquisition for a company that some of you may remember is DeVry Institute. It is now called Adtalem. They have grown tremendously over the last decade. Nancy and I met at Sara Lee. We were in the trenches. At that time, we had a CEO from Pepsi who was used to incredible talent solutions and processes. Nancy and I walked in. We had 4,000 positions we had to fill with no systems or processes and really not a talent framework. So we felt like we were in the trenches. Nancy went from that role onto DeVry, where I would check with her occasionally. One call would be, hey, we got a new CEO. The next call would be, we just divested 2 businesses. We bought one. I could go on and on, but one of the most profound calls was when she told me that they had a brick and mortar educational institute in Caribbean. And actually, there was a hurricane coming in, a dead set for their facility. She managed through all of that from a talent perspective. So it is my pleasure to to actually introduce my good friend, Nancy Johnson. I'm going to hand it over to Cindy and let them frame up this incredible experience and journey that Nancy has taken her organization on. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. So Nancy, it certainly sounds like your 14 years there, is that right? 14 years has been like 5 different jobs. Love to hear from your perspective what it was like going through that. And then what I'm most interested in hearing is your framework and how did you make this happen with so much change?
Sure. So I think, Susan, you got it right. It's been a crazy, a wild, dynamic ride. I do feel like I've worked for a number of different organizations. And interestingly enough, two different strategies, now moving to our third strategy as well. And so just pivoting our talent development strategy along that organization journey has been quite fascinating for me during that time. Some business ups, some business downs, two different CEOs, and essentially just trying to align our programs in a real dynamic, real-time way to what was going on in the businesses. And to your point, Susan, about the hurricanes, we had to do emergency evacuations of 2 schools from the Caribbean and set them up in 2 different places and continue to deliver the education for those students and didn't miss a beat. So yes, quite dramatic over that period of time, but we kept our talent first agenda always at the forefront for the work that we've done.
So Nancy, you're being modest. Susan's told me about the scale. Like, tell us about the growth of the business, and you've had divestitures and then acquisitions. Like, what was it like when you first came on board?
Sure. So when I started, about 60 to 70% of the business was DeVry University, as Susan mentioned. And from DeVry University, under our previous CEO, our strategy was really more of a global footprint. So we bought a number of schools in Brazil and really probably doubled our business, doubled our revenue without the acquisition of those schools. And then bought a couple other smaller organizations that had a bit more of a global footprint. And so that was happening under the previous CEO. And that was right around the economic downturn, which actually was really favorable for for-profit education as people retooled and wanted to go back to school. So we really had some nice tailwinds, happening at that point. And then within a year or 2 of that, maybe 3, some real challenging regulatory times within the U.S. On the for-profit sector. And we began to have some challenges in DeVry University and a few of other of our schools, but primarily DeVry University. We were fortunate to have Chamberlain, which was growing, continues to be a demand for nurses, while DeVry University's enrollment was declining. Ultimately, what happened is we had a CEO change. We've shifted our strategy with a doubling kind of focus on healthcare. And actually, one of the businesses that we divested was DeVry University. So what I joined is no longer part of the portfolio. And so that was a lot of change surrounding that kind of a shift. And then with the growth of Chamberlain, what you have is then just a real interest in healthcare and growing to continue to support healthcare professions through Chamberlain, our medical schools, and our vet school as well. And then finally, we're in the process of acquiring Walden University, which has a nursing school, and the combination of Walden and Adtalem will be the largest nursing school in the United States.
So from what I understand, it was at one point, like when you joined, 600 million in revenue, and it's over 2 billion now.
It will be, we got up to 2 billion, went back, and now we'll be back up to around 2 billion with Walden.
Yeah. So, and I often wonder what it's like to be in talent development in an educational institute, right?
Yeah.
Must be like being, I don't know, the doctor to the doctors. Give us a little bit of the landscape before we jump into your framework as to just at different times in the life cycle of the business, what you've had to do to scale up and down.
Sure. So I would say when I started, we had really no talent development plan or strategy or resources, a couple training classes, that was it. And so really what I had to do at the beginning of my experience is to really help the organization understand what is a talent first agenda, how to set up programs, practices, and resources to really leverage talent to grow your business. And in an educational environment, there tends to be a feeling that the classroom is the place that you get development. And so probably an over-indexing on a desire for a broad curriculum to develop people. And while we did develop a curriculum, part of what I and my team had to do was to educate, especially academic leaders, that really it's more about on-the-job experiential development primarily, with some coaching support and some classroom, but it's not the other way around. And so I think that part took some time, took a number of conversations to get the organization to understand that. And I think it's quite evolved over the number of years that I've been there in terms of
that's a topic in itself, right? Like we could spend hours talking about that, because I've seen many HR executives go from talent-rich environments like the PepsiCos of the world, right, where there's just this expectation of developing talent, to environments where HR is basically firefighting or dealing with just administrative issues, and there's not a lot of focus on talent development, and trying to get the executives there is pretty tough. So let's jump in though to your framework. So you have a 4-part framework. Love to get a quick overview of that, and then let's do a deep dive on each one.
Sure, sounds great. So there's really 4 things I think about, primarily is leadership capabilities, making sure that you think about the capabilities your leaders need in the organization to develop those. I think secondly is alignment of your talent, ensuring you've got the right people in the right roles. The third is acceleration. How do you accelerate? What resources do you use to accelerate talent to then leverage it? And then finally, it's measurement. And that's really about just ensuring that you have that constant continuous improvement and ways to measure whether your programs and resources are being effective for the business. So those are the 4 elements that I think about.
Okay, so let's jump into the capabilities piece, leadership capabilities needed for success for the business. Tell me a little bit more about maybe a story, right? Like how did you sort of go about this, as well as the framework that you took?
So I think from a capabilities standpoint, I'll say 2 things. I think from a macro and a micro. From a macro perspective, I think part of why our business was challenged, the story I shared before, was I think that we had growth through acquisition, but we were looking for organic growth. And now, as I look back on it, what I realize is that we really didn't have the product program management kind of capabilities that we needed in the business to drive organic growth. Those are capabilities, right? And then I don't think we had growth-oriented operating leaders. We had really good execution leaders, but we didn't have leaders that really would drive growth. So I think part of it from a macro perspective is just really looking at what skill sets you need to drive the business that way. From a micro perspective, we use capabilities. I'll give an example of this all the time. So a couple of years ago, after divesting DeVry University, where we had a number of operating leaders to draw from for general manager type roles, we kind of lost that pool of talent. And so what we had to do was figure out how to develop some folks that might come from different places from within. And so what we did is we worked with an outside firm to develop a deep profile of what an operating leader kind of skill set might look like, the experiences, the competencies, and the personality elements to that. And so we actually took an individual who was a finance director at one of our schools in the Caribbean, who showed some real promise and aspiration to be a general manager. And we moved him to a VP of finance role in one of our bigger businesses. And we've assessed him against this profile to help him understand what those gaps are. And so he's beginning to work on additional experiences to help get him even further ready for a general manager type position in the organization. And so for us, that's just a really good way to be clear about what we need in those roles and to be sure that we're giving people a path and they're developing the right things so they'll be successful when they move into that type of a role.
Yeah, that is so important today, because there's just not enough talent going around, right? And Susan, your statistic that you cited earlier is sort of scary. What, like the numbers going from 40 million to 85 million by 2030? I mean, that's alarming. And so if companies aren't doing this kind of development for their employees, they're going to, number one, lose them to someone else, and number two, their growth goals are going to be stunted for sure. And so that's an awesome story. How did he end up working out well as a general manager through this process?
He's in process. He's not quite there
Okay.
yet, but he's moving towards a role like that. There's an example of another person that actually did get the role, and it was an individual who we had a C-suite role open, and the individual interviewed for the C-suite role did not get it, but did get a real kind of briefing on what he was missing. Was then part of our Catalyst program, which I'll talk about in a minute, and got a coach, and we moved his job around a bit to give him some of the experiences he didn't have. And I'm really happy to say that he actually did get promoted to the C-suite role, both with the support from the Catalyst program, but also through this really good assessment process to help him understand what he was missing. And so to me, that was the perfect way this is supposed to work, right? If you don't get the role, what are you missing? And you still have potential. So then how do we help you close those gaps so that you can get that role that you show promise for?
Yeah, that's amazing because a lot of times you end up losing that talent, right? If you don't handle it on the back end.
Oh, yes,
To
absolutely.
let them know you really care about their development and
Yeah.
what the gaps are. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think the care part of it is huge. Like this person knew that it just wasn't the right time the first time around.
Mm-hmm. Does that include both technical capabilities as well as leadership, or?
It does. Yeah, it includes both in terms of kind of the profiles that we establish, whether it's in the search or through this P&L leader profile that we created. Yeah.
Or some big lessons learned from the capabilities side that if you could share that wisdom?
I think I just have to say, I think this is the foundational element, and it's hard because it's hard to get leaders to sit down and really think about this. Most businesses I'm in, people will say, well, just hire me that, or just develop me that. And then I'm supposed to know what that is. And so part of this is like, can we just, can we talk about what this is so that we don't hire you the wrong person or develop the wrong skill set for a successor that we're working on. So I think just, I don't know if it's a lesson or it's just that's a battle that I'm continuing to fight, and always looking for ways to influence leaders to really take the time to think through what capabilities are important. And it's a worthy conversation. It's a critical conversation.
I think sometimes because it goes further than just, do they understand what the capabilities are? Sometimes they don't have their maybe strategic priorities defined clearly too, right? So
Absolutely.
if they don't really know what success looks like, it's hard to describe sometimes what people that report to them should be doing.
Absolutely.
So let's move on to alignment. What do you mean by talent alignment?
So I think that's really about right people, right roles, and really thinking about ensuring that you're challenging yourself as an organization at all times to be sure that you're talking talent, you're evaluating talent, you're moving people in, out, and through the organization in a way that allows you to drive your strategies and your plans. And so there's a number of tools that we use to do that at Adtalem. Primarily, it's a talent review process where we do succession planning and 9-box placement. But it's more than the process. It's really, what do we do with the process? For an example, we use 9-box. And so at our Chamberlain College of Nursing, a couple of years ago, we really looked at the placement of our campus presidents. When you just sort of isolate that group and you look at them and you say, do we have the right level of campus presidents that are performing at the right level and with the right potential to move up into higher level operating roles? And we found that we didn't. And so we had to stop and we relooked at what is the profile for this role? What do we need to do with the folks that we have in role now? And then how do we need to hire differently? And so just going through that exercise gave us that picture and then allowed us to then go, okay, we're going to do something different to elevate the type of presidents that we hire. And actually, we're in a better position now than we were. Through that process gave us the insights. Yeah.
The business changing so much, right? And it's not just everything you all went through, but like it feels like in today's world, everything's just changing nonstop. It feels like once you get aligned, then you're almost out of alignment again. How did you manage through that? Do you have a story or some examples?
Of alignment. I think that it really is about constantly evolving.
Okay.
So maybe an example I'll share is we have a pivotal role list, and it's a list of roles that, 10 roles that we absolutely have to have A players in. as that business strategy shifts, sometimes that list shifts as well. But really, really, really asking ourselves and making it comfortable to talk about, do we have A players in those roles? And so I think part of it is just having that talent first agenda in those conversations and trying to force the conversation on perhaps a long-term person that has been quite dedicated to the organization, but just might not have the right skill set for the future. So I would just say sort of trying to adjust through some of those business challenges and making it comfortable for leaders to talk about talent. And when there is movement of people through the organization, even out of the organization, how do you pivot in the way that you need to, but also treat people really respectfully and fairly in the process of making those changes.
Right.
Wow.
And then the third area was leadership acceleration. A lot of companies are talking about this because there's not enough, that there's always seems like this hourglass issue, right, with succession. And sometimes you can't hire from the outside fast enough, or if you do, it's not necessarily the right culture fit. Tell us a little bit about your framework around leadership acceleration and what you've done.
Sure. So we have both a formal and an informal process. And I would say the formal process is our high potential development program, which is called Catalyst. That program is on its third iteration. So you asked earlier about, how we've navigated. Well, we've adjusted that based on budgets going up, budgets going down, and feedback on the program and best practice and things like that. In our most recent iteration, we worked with Executive Coaching Connections to help us redesign the program. So they've been really helpful in sort of taking it to the next level, helping us take it to the next level. And so that program with action learning teams and coaches, symposium, mentors, and so forth has really been, I think, quite a differentiator for us. It's been a great opportunity for us to retain talent that's really important for us and continue to build that pipeline of leaders for those critical roles. So I would say formally Catalyst is one of those programs. Informally, we just have a culture of development and a culture of coaching. So some of our senior level executives use ECC's partner program, where they're partnering, the senior exec is partnering with a coach who's also a former practitioner in their particular area. So we do things like that as well. And then I just say finally a culture of really driving home the point that all colleagues need development plans. And if you're high potential, we spend extra time with you, even if you're not in one of those programs, making sure you've got a good plan. We care, talking about talent, getting feedback, and helping you navigate your career.
Yeah. I know people are always really interested in these hypo programs, and not to get too tactical here, but can you give us a little bit more color around what kind of comments you're getting from some of your attendees of these programs?
Sure. I mean, I've had multiple people over the years, and we've had over 300 people go through the program in the last 8 to 10 years. And I would say I've heard comments like life-changing. I've heard comments like, boy, I learned so much about myself that I didn't know, and really have a good plan for what I need to work on to continue to accelerate my career. I will just make a comment that it's always amazing to me. I think when you're in HR, you think that, lots of people go through assessments, all the things that we do in HR. And I'm always amazed at how many people can get to a vice president level, for example, and never have done a 360, or never have done, some of the assessments we take for granted that I think really help people understand, their leadership style and strengths and things to work on. So I think people have looked at it as a gift, to be honest with you, a gift of the organization to them in terms of their growth.
That's so good. I remember many years ago, probably before Susan and I even met, coaching was sort of a negative thing, right? Like if you're getting coaching, it was a reprimand or you weren't doing something right. But today, you're right, people do look at it as a gift. And, at some point it might just be something employees expect, right? Whether they're hypo or not. I'm curious about the partner program. I think it's such a unique opportunity to work with executives who actually have been in that role. Can you expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say a few things, Susan, you might want to add too, because you might have some additional things to add that I might not say. But, I think that, often, and we've used that program at like the C-suite level, right? And I will just say that oftentimes we find that, a former HR executive as a coach or an IO psych as a coach can work at some levels of the organization. But I really often feel like I get asked for, and I believe that practitioner background is really, from a credibility perspective, from a relatability perspective, is often preferred at the C-suite level. And I think, quite effective at the C-suite level because they've walked a mile in the shoes of the individual. We had one individual who was a larger P&L leader with a partner through this ECC's program, and they were just a fabulous combination. And our executive really felt that, again, was getting really, really good insight and support, not just as a leader, but, on the business side of things too. The person was a former, I believe, a CEO of a telecom company.
Yeah, I mean, the roster of the partners on that is incredible. Susan, do you mind sharing a couple of the past backgrounds and the backgrounds of these folks?
Sure. I'll be real quick. So we've got Karen May, who ran Kraft Foods. She had a finance background initially, and then she was the chief human resource officer and brought together Mondelez. Rich Flores, also the chief human resource officer at McDonald's. We have CMOs, we have people who led at Cisco, we have CEOs who have run PE firms. So anything with the C, we work with Russell Reynolds to kind of bring in very current leaders, not people who have been retired for 30 years, but people who are sitting on boards, and they don't do it for the money. We couldn't charge enough. They're doing it because they really want to give back, and that's kind of the magic of the program. And they're more of a mentor. I think mentoring and coaching on a continuum have a blend. They're really focused on the how, and then or rather the what, and the coach on the how.
Yeah.
So it's a beautiful blend.
That's pretty incredible. Thanks for bringing that up,
Sure.
Nancy and Susan. Okay, so let's see. Finally, measurement. So I have to say this is my favorite topic because sometimes it is so hard to measure the human side of the business. But it is absolutely critical, right, for us to get more funding and to get more resources. Tell us a little bit about what you measure, how you measure it. How do you know if it's working?
Well, we try to measure everything we can, and sometimes that can be hard in HR, but we do try to measure everything we can. And so from a programmatic perspective for Catalyst, of course, we have your typical participant measures, measurements and feedback, as well as the same for managers. But we also look at engagement of the cohorts. We look at retention, we look at diversity as well. And so those we report on a regular basis. From our talent review process perspective, we look at mission critical talent, and we look at what is our retention, what is our engagement, and the percentage of individuals that are moving to other roles. So for the mission critical talent, which is like the top 50 jobs, we've had 90% retention over 10 years or so I've run the process. And then we have our key talent, which is our high potentials down the organization. We have 95% retention. So, we are really looking at retention and engagement primarily, and then job movements and things like that. And then finally, we have a talent scorecard that we've rolled out in the last 2 years. It's essentially a C-suite scorecard that looks at things like, are you moving your talent around? How diverse is your talent? How are they performing? How engaged are they? And are you retaining them? And so that just keeps a picture in front of the C-suite leader and the CEO to be able to talk about how a particular leader in their area is doing.
Wow, that is super impressive, Nancy. 90%, 95%, amazing. That's something to be really proud of. I'm curious, early on, right, before you had all the measurements though,
Yeah.
what did you use to show that it was working, right? To continue to get funding. I know some years were leaner than others, but.
Yeah, I think it was more of the, I would say, softer reputation and really checking in with the major leaders who had participants in our programs, anything that cost money. And the Catalyst program is the more expensive budget item, but constantly checking in to understand what the buzz on the program was about. What did you like? What didn't you like? And I think it just understanding who would advocate for it, right? And going into a budget session, ensuring that when budgets were challenged, we'd have other leaders just saying, no, don't cut that. Do not cut that program. We want that program.
Mm-hmm.
Keep it. This is important for us. So it really was more through influence and just checking reputation and making sure the program was at the caliber it needed to be, for the organization, so that they, sponsor it.
Right.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, and there might be some people who will go look you up and say, wow, your organization has 10,000 plus employees, you've got scale, you've got teams. But I'll tell you, I ran a 100-person firm, and talent development was one of our biggest differentiators, right? So without career pathing and development and the care and feeding of our consultants, we would not have been able to compete, because certainly we didn't have the big brand name, right? We didn't have the robust benefits. It was really about the people they worked with, but also the fact that they knew we were watching out for their careers. So we actually became a target, right? In some cases, for lots of firms that would want to pluck people from our environment, but we got a lot of boomerangs back too, because they recognized that the development was important. So what other, so just to recap, we've got capabilities, talent alignment, acceleration, and measurement. What other last minute advice would you have for people who are, let's say, trying to take their talent development programs up to the next level?
Yeah, so I think what I would say is start with the business strategy, in terms of where you're headed. Always have a lens on where you're headed and what's not working right now, and look at what capabilities do you really need in the organization. Start from capabilities and back into talent. And back into challenging yourself to be sure that you've got the right skills and capabilities to move forward. I think trying to get it on top of the agenda of the CEO and the C-suite is huge. I think you can still, to your point, Cindy, you can still make headway without big budgets if you have leaders that care and just intuitively know how to do this, which is about talking about careers, investing in people, and giving them opportunities to grow, and who really think about talent as a strategic differentiator, regardless of whatever the budget is, that can drive your strategy.
I love how you approached it from bottom up and top down, because I've also heard of organizations that just sort of did the hypo thing, and they didn't really take care of the C-suite. And then you see a big fallout, because then everybody who got trained on good leadership development is like, well, I don't see it at the top. Right. And then you have this huge fallout. I remember this one company in Milwaukee that happened, like all the directors left at once. And I'm like, what happened? Why did you guys all leave? And they're like, well, we finally figured out what good leadership looks like, and it wasn't here. One of the big consequences, right, of not tackling it in both directions. Nancy, great job. And thank you for sharing your story with us. Susan, would you like to say any last minute words here?
Yeah, I just, my only comment, just listening to Nancy and her journey, I mean, and thinking about some of the data and statistics for any HR leader listening to these messages, I think the next decade certainly is going to be a wild one around talent. And I think there is no greater opportunity or platform for any HR leader at any level to be able to have that discussion with the senior leadership team, as Nancy eloquently kept driving home the point of strategy. What is the strategy? What is the talent that we need? I mean, the opportunity and the appetite is there for the senior leadership. And I think it's just a great time for HR to lean in. I know that many have already and will continually to do so, but the next decade should be very, very exciting, challenging. And I think some of the things, the framework that Nancy kind of put together, I hope will be a helpful framework of moving down those next next several years in front of us.
Yeah, well, Nancy, Susan, thank you so much. For our audience who's listening, when you are at the Big HR event this year, make sure you come over and thank Susan Madonia for continuing to sponsor and support our Big HR event. Would not be possible without sponsors like Executive Coaching Connections. And lastly, we will provide in the show notes couple of links. We'll have Susan and Nancy's LinkedIn. I hope that's okay, Nancy, your LinkedIn profile, so our HR leaders can connect with you. And also we will link to the partner coaching program as well as the HIPO coaching program as well. All right.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. And have a great weekend, ladies.
You too.
Thanks.